Welcome to Retail Retold, the stories behind how that store landed in your neighborhood. I'm Chris Ressa, in conversation with the people and stories shaping retail and real estate. Brought to you by DLC.
Welcome to What's in Store with Carly and Chris, the show where we cover hot topics at the cross-section of retail and real estate. I'm your host, Carly Iacono, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Ressa. Chris, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? Surviving the summer?
Surviving the summer.
Nice. I heard you just did a whirlwind retailer tour. How'd that go?
Retailer tour went great.
Okay.
Came back from the West Coast and then went to Hershey Park this weekend.
So fun. I love that.
You've been to Hershey Park?
Love Hershey Park. It's like the most adorable amusement park for little kids in the country.
So, little retail tidbit. Inside Hotel Hershey, I don't know if it's a full store licensed. They have like a Viore store, a Lulu store, something. I don't know if it was hard to see if it was like just selling the products or they actual stores. I couldn't really tell, but it was pretty wild that they were so on trend and on brand.
That's brilliant.
And then in the park, they had a Starbucks, Nathan's Hot Dogs, Chick-fil-A. And by the way, I was at the park yesterday. Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays inside Hershey Park.
Well, they can't break the rule just for Hershey.
Exactly.
Come on. You know how many people would be mad if just Hershey got
know.
Sundays and nobody else? But that's really, really impressive cross-branding because you have the captive audience. You know what that age group wants, right?
For sure.
Just a tasty little drink. Starbucks, you can never get too many of those.
Yes, it was. It is like the coolest amusement park for little kids. And I got
big fan.
I got into the history of Hershey and Milton Hershey and from his
really cool, isn't it?
Yeah, really cool. What he did from a business perspective, fascinating. So
very altruistic too. His charities and the school system that he started. If you really dive in deep, it's amazing. It was incredible.
It was really cool. So.
All right, so everyone visit Hershey.
Yeah,
that's our takeaway for today.
That's the
You're
takeaway.
on the East Coast, right?
And if you want a homemade Reese's Buttercup,
you're putting your hands out like this.
It was like this. It was like this. It was unbelievable.
So if you want a 2-foot Reese's,
yes.
Do you say Reese or Reese's? Reese?
Reese's.
Reese's.
I don't know. That's what I say.
All right.
You?
I don't think Reese's.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to really agree on that today.
Fair enough.
I think it's probably safe if we move on.
Go ahead.
All right, good stuff. So today's episode, we're not talking about whether or not retailers want more stores. We know that they do. We're not talking about vacancy levels because it's still historically low. Nothing has changed. So the market dynamics are the same, right? This push and pull. What we are going to talk about is what this means for the underlying market now and maybe what the next 5 years look like, because these two factors have been in place for years now, and it does not seem to be changing in a material way with the supply constraints. So all that being said, how are we expecting any change? And what do you think is the lever that would make the supply imbalance switch?
Well, the question came up last week, and I've been asked this question since Vegas, and I keep getting asked this question, which is, when are we going to have meaningful development of shopping centers in the United States?
These are your tenants asking you to make it easier. Right.
There you
Please,
go.
Chris, make it easier. How do we do that?
And I give the same answer to everybody, which is it's really a rent challenge. When the rent has to move meaningfully for us to get to, a large-scale new development across the United States. What I am feeling, just anecdotally, is, retailers are definitely craving some new development because they're struggling to find opportunities. And what I think is going to happen, and we're starting to see happen, is that desire and hearing from many landlords that the rent needs to move up, I think is pushing and going to continue to push rents up between now and whenever we get to new development. I was telling everyone, at least 5+ years before the rent gets to a place that actually makes sense for new development. But I think retailers are prepared to start paying more and more to the point where we get massive new development. I'm not sure, but when they want a location they're stepping up, and we're going to see what happens. But yeah, the desire for new development is real, and we're not seeing it right now. That's making existing real estate more valuable and driving up rents.
So it's all just an equation, right? Really, when you're looking at a new construction project as a developer, does my exit value, right, warrant the cost of building the site? And it's all predicated on what rent the tenant is paying. So that makes sense. From the tenant side, we hear a lot of that's too high, or I can't pay that rent, or in an existing deal, I need a rent reduction, right? The opposite of what you're saying. So do you think for new construction, there really is a rent ceiling, or are you arguing that many, not all, but many national retailers have more room to run and they can pay more rent, and you think that they're now, not just they could, but now they're willing to pay more rent to get the store? So what's changed on this push and pull?
Net effective rents have risen. Maybe not the face rent, but you and I have talked about, like, if retailers are putting more in stores from a capital perspective, and the landlord, maybe if it was a $20 deal with $100 in TI 5 years ago, maybe that deal is $21 or $22 and $40 in TI. Well, that's real net effective rent growth. Mm-hmm. The face rate is pretty similar on paper.
Right.
But the net effective rent growth is meaningful. And so, to me, that says retailers are investing in stores. They might want to keep that face rate as low as they can, but I definitely think it's getting away. Rents are growing and getting away from them. And, we're seeing that face rents are growing. I would say net effective rent feels like it's growing potentially faster. But what I would say, retailers are disciplined, though, right? When they want a location and they know based on all their data it's the right location, they're willing to do what it takes to get that location. When they're on the fence on a location,
right,
it's going to be hard to push there. As it relates to rent reductions, I'm not seeing a lot of rent reductions. I am seeing, retailers try to do blend and extends to, lower their occupancy costs long term, but not a ton of just pure rent reduction requests. Like in Vegas, I didn't have one retailer come to the booth and say, hey, this is the program, we need rent reductions. Generally sales are doing well, predicting a pretty good holiday,
right,
and sales are an indicator of rent. And I think the store, because of you can't make money in clicks without the bricks, the store is made more valuable today than it's ever been to a retailer, from a connection to the consumer, from a place of profit, from a place to grow e-commerce sales. And so I think the store is becoming more valuable to most tenants of retail real estate.
So they're potentially willing to pay more rent to control it and be in the A spaces. Do you think there's a geographical element to this? Because rents have risen somewhat unevenly around the country, right? Certain areas have had more rent growth and others, some have been more flat. So do you think we have a compressed, let's call it maybe the Sun Belt, a compressed rent runway here where rents grow or have grown faster, so we're closer to having development deals pencil? We also have, of course, lower construction costs, lower land costs in certain geographies in the U.S. So could it be that it might be 5 years for the Northeast till we see meaningful development, but maybe we continue to see an uptick in development in the Southeast? I mean, do you think that there's enough of a difference there or no?
I don't think there's enough of a difference. I think the scarcity in that equation is just land, mm-hmm, and the availability of land. Clearly, there's been a run-up in growth given migration to the Sun Belt, in particular Arizona, Texas, and Florida. They're probably having the most meaningful development today, but land plays a factor in that, right? If interest rates continue to rise, right, if interest rates rise, mm-hmm, I think that's going to put pressure on the construction cost. It's going to put pressure on cap rates, making it more necessary for rent to grow in order to do development deals.
Going to continue to put pressure, right, on cap rates and construction costs, because we've seen that for, 4 years now. It's been a long time. So, unfortunate that it's not going the other way, but I think you're right. I think we're going to keep seeing more pressure on development from those elements, and so therefore the only other answer is rent, really. So that might be the answer. So this isn't immediate, obviously, right? We're not going to see rents jump 10, 20%, right? So deals aren't going to pencil tomorrow. who does this benefit in the next 5 years? Like to me, it feels like it's a pretty good day, pretty good year to be a landlord.
Yeah, if you own existing real estate, that quality real estate, that's a good spot to be because there's demand for your shopping center, your piece of land, and you probably are able to get more rent today than you were 10 years ago. And so that's a pretty good place to be. And the horizon for new construction, new development feels, pretty far out as you stand there and look. And so I think it's a pretty good, place to be if you're an existing landlord. Doesn't change anything as it relates to cap rates,
Right.
And interest rates. But from a pure growing your rent roll, it's a good place to be.
I think it's very encouraging that you think we have a lot more room to run in rents, that we're
Yeah.
not nearing a rent ceiling that's not sustainable for tenants. And there's so much data, as we talk about all the time, between, sales per square foot and occupancy costs and online sales and how that relates to actual physical retail and the flagship. And we're not going to go down all these roads, but I think the fact that there's more data around the value of the store and proving that probably gives the retailers comfort that they can pay more rent and it's not just sales per square foot driven.
Yeah, I think headline news is missing and underplaying how valuable the physical store is.
Right.
I think that's one of the keys that's come out of like the COVID era is how valuable the physical store is.
Love that. So when we say physical store, it used to be one prototype per retailer, right? We knew that Target always looked the same everywhere they were. And now there's small ones, there's big ones, there's super Targets, right? I'm just picking a retailer. And this seems to be the trend, not just that everything's getting smaller, which is what we talked about maybe 5 years ago, right? The store was getting smaller. Now some stores are getting bigger, some are getting smaller, some are doing pop-ups as a way to grow and capture new market share. What is your take on this store divergence? Let's call it a strategy.
Yeah, I've never heard more retailers talk to me on the real estate side about all their places of distribution to get products into consumers' hands. And I think that most retailers have more than one way to do it. And it felt like, call it 10 years ago, that a lot of the ways were pretty similar. Everyone was chasing what I would call like a standard prototype and e-commerce. Mm-hmm. And now you're seeing a lot of different areas for retailers to get distribution to retailers, whether that's, some retailers have full price stores, outlet stores, clearance stores. Some retailers have a small market prototype, a large market prototype, and some retailers in certain markets want to cluster stores together, some of them, and have a market share play. Some want to spread out stores. And sure, there's always been some level of this, but the discussion around distribution in real estate departments and how to get as much product to as many consumers as possible has never been more present, in my opinion. It's coming up in my conversations with retailers, and it really didn't, call it 5-10 years ago. And so I find that super interesting, and it's interesting to learn all these new ideas that these retailers have. And it's coming from a place of data now that there's so much data that they have on their customers, on their stores, on the real estate types, from e-commerce, from their supply chains, all this data that they can now package up and like use to make actionable decisions. I think retailers are getting much smarter about every decision they make, and I think that's good for retail real estate.
It felt like it used to be a just kind of scatter strategy, throw everything out there, see what sticks, right? The old acronym there. And now it's more intentional. So the prototypes are diverging not because retailers don't know what works, but because they have the data to show that it probably will work. It's
For
almost
sure.
like they're coming at it from the other side and not out of desperation that, excuse me, we need to try this smaller prototype because our stores aren't productive. Now it's, well, we want to keep the big store and let's squeeze the small one over here because we think that will work in XYZ market. So I think it's a shift in how they're even trying new formats, which probably gives it a higher likelihood of success, I would assume.
For sure. Yeah, I think that when headlines come out and they're like, oh, stores are decreasing size of footprint or stores are increasing size of footprint, I think in today's world that leaves a lot to be desired. There's a lot more nuance to it than just that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to see that by, all the different things retailers are doing right now.
Now, as a landlord, would you underwrite more risk for a new prototype? Let's say you have two leases from the same tenant. One is their legacy prototype that you've always seen them in, and one is a new, completely different, maybe smaller, bigger, whatever it is. Would you underwrite more risk because it's a new prototype, or you're really still just looking at the credit on the lease?
I think you're looking at the credit on the lease first and foremost. I think where you start to think about that is when you're really talking about a new concept, right? When someone's coming out with a new concept, I think that's when
That's different.
Yeah, that's different. And typically that new concept, the terms that the retailer's going to do are going to be different than their legacy because they have, a lot more conviction around it. But not necessarily a new prototype, but new concept.
Okay, that makes sense. And do you think this is driven because of the lack of space or just because of the new amount of data and analysis that retailers can do so they understand the value of different prototypes, or is this that they've got to open and now they've got to be flexible?
I think retailers are disciplined and they're doing it because their strategy and data are saying they should do it.
Got it. That's
Yeah.
definitely a shift
Yeah.
than what we've been saying,
Yeah.
right? The last few years. So that's
Yeah.
very interesting. I was in New York City this past week, basically every day for work and meetings, and I had my kids with me one of the days, and they had mapped out their whole day to do pop-ups of brands that they like, but also flagships. And so I had, tried to plan all these activities for them. They threw out everything I came up with as, ridiculous, of course, and planned their whole day. And they went from brand pop-up to brand pop-up. They bought stuff. They got free stuff. And then they also went to certain flagships that were only in New York City to buy stuff and interact with the brand. And they found these locations through TikTok influencers and Instagram about where the pop-ups were going to be. And these are Glossier, Starbucks, well-known brands that you would hear of, right? Brandy Melville, big teen brands. And so they were using media differently than I would have even considered, of course, right, to plan a day in the city, and then taking that and going to purchase goods and interact with the brand. So I thought it was really interesting. And the fact that it wasn't just, we must go to the flagships or we want to be at this pop. It was a wide range. They didn't care what the format was. They just wanted to be close to the brand while they were in the city.
What's the hot teen brand that your daughters are into these days?
Brandy Melville was big. I went into the store the first time. It's madness. Absolutely crazy. They have, I'll just quick side story. Everything in the store is the same size. Did you know that?
No.
There's one size of a women's clothing store. Every item is the same size. Now, some are big, some are small. I don't know, but everything comes in one size, and they just turn over the inventory constantly. And I'm like, this is brilliant, right? No waste, just that's it. You see what you get. And there was a line. We waited to get into the store. There was a line down the block because you couldn't fit enough people in the store.
How does that work, that they're all the same size? It's just the style. We'll have it baggy, we'll have it tight. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. It's either a tight little tank top or it's baggy sweatpants. Some are different lengths, and either it fits you or it doesn't. And then you don't buy that if it doesn't fit you.
Wow.
Yeah. I was blown away. Thought it was fascinating. And just the demand and the way they interacted with the clothes, they fully accepted that it was all one size. It was like, well, that's just how it is. You make it work. Some things fit you here and some things don't.
Wow.
So anyway, it was very eye-opening to see through, I guess, their gen. I don't even know what their generation's called. What, Y, Z, whatever it is.
Alpha,
yeah. So to see shopping through their eyes, they definitely wanted to be in person, and they definitely wanted to interact with the brands touch, to be part of it, to take pictures, to be, make a reel, whatever the kids do. And that was very, very important to them. So
Interesting.
to see how the brands were connecting and the physical retail was really very cool.
Interesting.
And then the cross branding too, right? The collaborations of different stores was pretty neat. So I think, to your point, a lot of that's data driven. They probably knew where the pop-ups were going to work because they knew the part of the city that would have the right audience or attract the kids, and then they knew the marketing channels that would drive them there and the time frame. Anyway, it was really interesting. So.
Did you buy something for yourself from Brandy Melville?
So ironically, I was the only one who bought something. I had 3 girls with me, and they were all like, "None of this stuff is great. This, we don't like this season." And I found a really cute sweater.
Awesome.
So I did. It fits grown-ups too.
Very cool.
So yeah, it was fun. But to your point, I think tying it back and not getting too off the rails here, the different formats certainly feel more intentional than desperate. I think a few years ago it was, we've got to expand. We don't have a choice. Let's squeeze into this space. Now we know we can make this work. Maybe we tweak a few things in inventory, but we know that model overall will work. So let's move on to our last point, and that's, with all of these things in mind, how are lease clauses and negotiation over lease terms changing? Because we know we've got rent, and that's number one here in the discussion, but there's so much more, I don't have to tell you, to crafting a landlord or tenant favorable lease. Have you seen any other material changes? Assignment, go dark, anything else?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's one provision, but what I would say is, from 2008 to 2019, every deal, the lease got more tenant friendly, right? And more tenant friendly. And what we're starting to see is a reversion of that now. And where, if it's really not critical, retailers are definitely much more willing to let something go that maybe isn't as critical, but was the form, had to be,
right,
this was the process, than they once were. And that is super encouraging. And I think there's a willingness to talk and be creative around provisions, even if we're not eliminating it, but to make it more balanced and to make it more applicable to that specific piece of real estate. There's a lot of leases out there that have provisions that are stock provisions not applicable to that piece of real estate, but it was what somebody wanted in a deal because it was all their deals. That's challenging as you start to, move through time and you're dealing with a lease that really wasn't applicable to that property. Well, now, and that tenant mix, I think now retailers are much more open to be creative and open-minded on the non-monetary provisions around things that are applicable to that center. And I think you're going to see more of this where it's like, let's not get lost in this. Let's figure out how to get a deal done. And we're starting to see it, and I think you're going to continue to start to see it.
So I thought we had a swing from really, really long leases to a push to a short form lease. Maybe this was you saying you thought this was a good idea. This was a while ago, maybe years ago. So now it almost sounds like instead of a short form lease, there's a case for individualized leases. If we're swinging back the other way, right, we're writing a lease that's completely applicable to this tenant and this property, is that affecting deal timelines? Is it slowing things down?
I think that generally, first off, I think most groups have a short form and a long form lease. That's still out there, based on the complexity of the deal. The more complex the deal, the longer the lease is going to be, and that's just the nature of it. That said, I think that, everyone wants to get deals done fast. I think this goes back to, there's so many parties involved in a lease, that so many decision makers. That's the timeline. I don't think, I think the things I'm talking about make the lease negotiation shorter, but at the same time, there could be one thing that happens outside of anyone's control that makes the lease longer in a nanosecond.
Right.
The lease timeline longer in a nanosecond.
Or the negotiation timeline.
Yeah. So I still think there's a lot of runway to go for landlords and tenants to
Optimize, shorten
the timeline from like
yeah.
substantial interest in an opportunity to actually store opening. That timeline needs to compress, for sure.
Can we just go ahead and blame the attorneys on this? Because I feel like they're pretty easy to blame.
Yeah, I mean, retailers, one of the ways retailers have solved this on their end, and I don't know if they've solved this, is just they're building pipelines for the future.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so their answer is maybe we can't cut the timeline. We have a process, landlord has a process, municipality has a process, all these people have processes. And so cutting the timeline's tougher. We're going to do the best we can. We'd love to make it shorter, but there's only so much we can do. And so what have they done is they build their pipeline for this year, and then they automatically start building the pipeline for the year after, and the year after that, and the year after that.
Wow.
And so there's deals being negotiated right now for, late 2028 deliveries for sure.
That's amazing. So then maybe you have a little more wiggle room in the timeline of negotiation if you know this is not a store slated until 2028. I mean, nobody wants delays, but maybe that's part of it.
That for sure.
They have some
you have
breathing
prioritization,
room.
Right? Because you probably
Right.
have 3 or 4 deals that you slotted for 2026 that aren't done yet, and that's where you turn to.
Right. So maybe it's not as much of an
Yeah.
issue. What about specific provisions like go dark? I know this is a big thing for anchor tenants. Are you seeing this go into inline uses or pad sites? As, I guess, retailers kind of optimize their strategy and move things around or change prototypes, there is a chance that they may not want a certain store. So are you finding more importance for go dark provisions, or it's really just kind of the same and really no change?
I don't think there's a big change in the go
Okay.
dark provision. I think that landlords usually believe that the most important thing in the center is the tenant pays rent, or in the lease is the tenant pays rent, and the second most thing is they open and operate.
Right.
And retailers want flexibility to be able to close a store even if they have to have a lease term and pay rent. And so that's still an ongoing
Discussion.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? Assignment, guarantors, anything else meaningfully
Probably the
changing that
most
you've seen?
meaningfully changing and the most flex is through the use restrictions. I think that's probably one of the more flex. Even today you look, there's pre-2008 there was provisions that restricted the center from being health care oriented.
Right.
There's an urgent care like in every center. Shopping center in America today.
Right.
Gyms, restaurants. There's a lot more flexibility around uses than yesteryear. I think that's probably
A big
one of
change.
the biggest ones.
Are you seeing tenants want more flexibility on their use cases as maybe their business morphs, or they have, I guess, complementary brands that they want to bring in, et cetera? Do you see them pushing for more flexibility, or is it more just landlords?
They've always pushed for as much flexibility on that. I don't think that's changed for sure.
Okay.
That's not a new one, in my opinion.
So we have all of our old horses of negotiation still in place between landlord and tenant. It's really just timeline and rent.
On a one-off basis, I would say that there's flexibility inside provisions. And I would say that when I think of the non-monetary provisions, retailers being more flexible, I would say that it's not one provision that's changing. I would just say the overall tone and tenor of the negotiation, like how hard someone's willing to push, how much are we going to have a standoff on this piece. I think there's been a come to grips where we have to let go a little bit here. Not necessarily to any one provision. It doesn't mean that the go dark provision is not important and they're willing to let that go. I just mean on the overall context of the lease negotiation.
Right. The goal is to get the deal done, not fight about it and move on to the next one, because there may not be a next one, next space. So interesting. Last thing on this, are you seeing any real change with the local tenants or the small businesses? I think a lot of what we've been talking about is the national tenants that you meet with right around the country. What about local tenants? Are they struggling? Are they doing okay that you've seen in your centers? And if they do choose to close, do you have a pipeline of backup local tenants that want to backfill, or are those spaces becoming a little more difficult?
I think the American entrepreneur is strong today,
Resilient.
and continues to have a desire to open new businesses, scale their existing business. Some people are definitely, I would say the biggest shift is from the local entrepreneur is how quickly they want to get to a monetization, right? Entrepreneurs talk about, maybe we're selling to private equity, maybe we're franchising sooner than they did 5-7 years ago.
Interesting.
Right? They've seen huge wins of groups out there. And so that's probably the biggest change, whereas like you would think it might be early, but they're already thinking, and more people are thinking about taking this concept to a large monetization much earlier on, right? It used to be, 10, 15 years ago, a local tenant opened is because, they were trying to put food on the table for their family.
Right.
This is something they knew. They opened up a business, and it was going to be this, and maybe it took off generations.
Right?
Maybe it took off and they opened up a second location.
Right.
There's many more groups going in or people going in today where before they even open one, they're thinking about their 10th, and they're thinking about how do I scale this and an exit and all that.
That's a very interesting structural change.
Yeah.
I guess in some cases that probably improves your guarantees, and in some you have private equity and debt and all the things that come along with it. So that could be a double-edged sword.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Very interesting, though.
Yeah.
All right. So it sounds like for the next 5 years, we have, and we're just picking a number out of a hat here, but for the next few years, it's going to be good to be a landlord. Rising rents,
think so.
No meaningful supply because we're not quite at that inflection point where construction pencils yet. But we've got a little more runway.
I think so.
All right. So nice catching up. Thanks for all those insights.
Thank you.
Good luck. It sounds like a good position to be in.
All right. Thank you.
To everyone listening, that was this episode of What's in Store with Carly and Chris. We're so happy you tuned in, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Have a great day, everyone.
Appreciate you watching. Hit subscribe. See you in the next one.